Libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade.
More competitive, less centralized.
Not military confrontations, but peaceful interaction.
The war on drugs has been actually an unmitigated disaster.
All right. So it's an Abrahamic place. When Muslims go there, they go between the two little hills because it was Abraham's wife Hagar run between those and looking for water for the baby Ishmael. So it's very Abrahamic. Muslims have the Eid, we slaughter lamb. We don't personally do it generally, but there's the idea. It's to honor the story, sacrifice story of Abraham. So it's a very Abrahamic religion. In that sense, there are a lot of themes in Islam that the two other religions can understand. However, there are also some differences. And with Christianity, I think the biggest difference of Islam is that in Christianity, the idea of sacred law, a God-given law, was by and large abandoned right there in the beginning. First through Jesus, at least he criticized the Pharisees and legalists, and he called on fellow believers around him to look into intentions and the morals of the law rather than being dry legalists. And then Paul came, he abandoned the whole law, with a few exceptions, of course. That's why Christians are not circumcised, That's why Christians can eat pork. That's why in Christianity the idea of law is not that central. Islam followed the Judaic pattern, which is there's a God-given law and you should implement that law. It is very much in line with Judaism in that sense. In Judaism, it's called the halakha, the God-given sacred law, and in Islam, it's called the Sharia. And that's where a lot of controversy is rooted in. So we'll open that a little bit. But there was also a difference between Judaism and Islam. Jews stopped implementing halakha as a penal code 2,000 years ago. Like almost 2,000 years ago. What happened 2,000 years ago? Romans came and they destroyed, the Jewish kingdom, Jewish whole country, and made Jews exiled people. So Jews became minorities 2,000 years ago. Until the state of Israel, Jewish people were persecuted minorities in different parts of the world. So halakha became just a law that you observe in the community, but it did not become a penal code. It was not the law of the land. In Islam had political power from the very beginning. Prophet Muhammad was persecuted in the beginning in Mecca. He went to Medina. He had to flee and to save his life and the life of the believers. There he established a community, a state. We don't call it a state, but people call it a state, a political entity, let's say. And when he passed away, Muslims chose successors to him, caliphs. They became political leaders as well. So Islam had political power from the very beginning. Therefore, in Islam, the Sharia turned into a whole political legal system. And this political legal system of the Sharia was, in many ways, quite advanced for its time. What do I mean? Before Islam, Arab women did not have any right to own property. With Islam, they gained the right to own property. Before Islam, Arabs had terrible customs like killing their baby girls because boys were valued and girls were seen as unnecessary. Islam banned that, for example. So there was a lot of progress in early Islam, and that is testified by a lot of experts who study Islamic history. Also, Islam did something unusual for its time and age through the whole legal system that we call Sharia, tolerated Jews and Christians. As Muslims created an empire stretching from Spain to India, they said, Jews and Christians, they're not exactly right. We are the upgraded version of monotheism, but we tolerate them. They have the rights to remain as Jews and Christians. They're not equal. They do not have the exact same equal rights with Muslims. They have to pay an extra tax, but they could worship in their churches or synagogues and live as who they are. And for that time, it was a very progressive thing. That's why today you have Arab Christians, you have Coptic Christians, you have Palestinian Christians, you have Lebanese Christians. These Christian communities lived in predominantly Muslim societies for 14 centuries. Actually, the non-Muslim minorities in the Muslim world had their worst time in the 20th century, mostly because of nationalism. In the Ottoman Empire, the Armenians lived and flourished in the Islamic Ottoman Empire until 1915, when a nationalist government in Turkey thought that they should be swept aside and pushed all to Syria, and that led to the greatest disaster, I think, in Ottoman history. Hundreds of thousands of people died. So for its time, actually, Islam created a pluralistic system and a toleration to non-Muslims, and that was, I think, an important thing, and that's why there were many episodes of Jews fleeing from Europe and going to the Islamic lands. The Jewish community in Turkey is Sephardic, which means they are coming from Spain. They were in Spain until the time of Columbus, but the Inquisition gave them the choice of convert or die or go. They left Spain and they came to the Ottoman Empire. For the Ottomans, great, you're people of the book, just do what you want. And Jews became very loyal, actually, citizens of the Ottoman Empire. They were not called citizens yet, they were called subjects. In the 19th century, they were called citizens too. So actually, by pre-modern standards, by pre-modern human rights standards or freedom standards, the Islamic world was not doing bad at all. And this has been acknowledged by a lot of prominent people like Bernard Lewis or sometimes critics of Islam as well. But things started to change in the modern era. What happened was that in the West, new concepts started to emerge. Equality before law. Nobody thought about that 5 centuries ago, or maybe some people did, but it didn't become a legal reality. Freedom, the freedom to criticize the government. Freedom of religion, that you could choose any religion you want, right? Or not be religious. Freedom of speech, you could speak your mind. Even if it's blasphemous, it's your idea. So these new ideas started to come with modernity, and they emerged in the West. Because of this, some people think that these are exclusively Western ideas, and I don't agree with them. They flourished in the West more so than other places. But the West also borrowed from different traditions and so on and so forth. But I do admit that the modern notion of human rights, yes, arose in Western societies more than anywhere else. Terrible things happen in the West too. I mean, Nazism emerged in the West too in the 20th century. So a lot of things were being tried with modernity, and some of them were terrible things. But ultimately, the broad idea of liberal democracy, a system of human rights, democracy, and markets and all that, that became pretty much of a Western paradigm. And I think that brought a lot of good things to humanity. Now, compared to that, there are important gaps between the classical interpretations of Sharia and the modern standards of human rights. Like what? Let's say religious freedom. Well, that was why I got arrested in Malaysia, by the way. Thanks for reminding that. I mean, I gave this conference in Malaysia like a year and a half ago saying that, religious freedom is a value that we Muslims should embrace. And if people want to change their religion and stop being a Muslim and become an atheist or a Christian, we don't want to see that, but we should tolerate that. I mean, we should think it's their right, if they're following their conscience, so we can't do anything about it. Well, Malaysians don't think like that. Not all Malaysians. Well, Orthodox, let's say, conservative. The Malaysian religion police certainly doesn't think like that. So they had to interrogate me the next day on this. Saudis don't think like that. The Iranians don't think like that. Sudanese or Yemenis. And again, I'm not saying all Saudis. I'm referring to their established authorities. Because in classical interpretations of Islamic law, changing your religion, abandoning Islam, is called apostasy. And apostasy is considered as a crime. And the punishment is not a fine or something. Punishment is death penalty. Like if you go out and say, well, I changed my mind, I'm now an atheist, I used to be a Muslim, you can be executed for that. You can be executed in about some dozen countries. At least you'll be jailed and flogged for sure. And they will try to make you repent and so on and so forth. And in some countries like Egypt, there are no bans, but vigilante groups can target you, which it happened. And also, if you're not an apostate, actually you say, I'm a believing Muslim, but you have an idea that goes against the orthodoxy, and it's heretical for them, they can call you an apostate. Although you say, no, I'm a good believing Muslim, they say, no, you're apostate, And you can be in trouble for that. So here is a problem. There are issues like this. Blasphemy. Can you speak up your mind and say something irreverent towards religious values? What about equality before law? Do women have exact equal rights with men? I certainly think so. Otherwise, my wife would kill me, right? And in my country, Turkey, we have secular law, so we have that. Although there are a lot of patriarchal-minded men, society is sometimes a different problem than the laws. But even in Tunisia, the most promising case right now in the Muslim world, only recently they passed a law which says women can get the exact same share in inheritance. When you die, you have a son and a daughter. Do you leave it equal to them, or does the boy get twice? The son gets twice in classical interpretations of Islamic law. Woman gets half of it. And in Tunisia, they barely passed that, and there was a lot of opposition for that. Why? Because in Islamic law, that's not the case. So we have certain tensions between the modern idea of human rights, of religious freedom, freedom of speech, and the classical interpretations of Sharia. And again, I'm emphasizing interpretations now, and I'll come to that to explain why. This one warning, though, this doesn't mean that every Muslim is an agent of creeping Sharia and they want to bring it everywhere from Oklahoma to Dakota, and you don't need to ban Sharia in the middle of the Midwest. Most Muslims are just trying to live and make their lives, and And do they respect Sharia? Yeah, I respect Sharia. I obey the Sharia. This morning I obeyed Sharia. I went there to the Holiday Inn buffet, and I got this nice-looking omelet. Then I said, "Oh my God, there's pork in it," so that I didn't eat it, right? And I asked for a non-pork, omelet. So that was an observance of the Sharia, because the Sharia can mean your personal observance too. It's just like the halakha. And if it is about your personal observance, there is no problem with that. In a free society, eat your pork or don't eat it. Who cares? It's your freedom, right? Drink alcohol or do not drink alcohol. Wear a headscarf, by all means, right? No problem. Or wear a miniskirt, that's your choice. And Muslims can be observant Muslims in Western society. And most of them appreciate this. They actually appreciate this because they can't be fully who they are in their own society sometimes. They're forced to do so. Or there are some certain norms. Or they can be Shia under a Sunni state, or they can be Sunni under a Shia state. They can have these problems. So in the West, they appreciate these things. So it doesn't mean that every Muslim is trying to bring Sharia as a political system. But there are groups that we call the typical Islamists. They think that what is written in classical interpretations of Sharia, in jurisprudence, fiqh, as we would call it, it's valid. We should have it everywhere. That's God's will. So that is a problem we have today in the Muslim world when it comes to human rights. Terrorism is not directly about this. Terrorism is super marginal. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these groups are very dangerous, but they're very marginal. But when you come to these human rights issues, you have problems in the mainstream. So in mainstream Saudi Arabia, you have these problems. Yeah. In Saudi country, and authorities are against terrorism, but if you're an apostate, they will still cut your head. That's not terrorism, that's law, but still not a very liberal thing to do. So we have a problem with the mainstream interpretations here. Now, however, since the 19th century, a lot of Muslims began to rethink about these issues. First of all, they noticed that there are these new ideas in the West, which looks really good. Works fine, democracy, human rights, equality, and it made Western society successful. So Western influence led to a rethinking of Islamic tradition. It began in the Ottoman Empire, under the young Ottomans, people like Namik Kemal. It began in the Arab world with reformist scholars like Muhammad Abduh. In Pakistan, Sayyid Ahmad Khan. So these kind of scholars and intellectuals came to the scene saying that, hey, listen, we Muslims have a problem. We are sticking to classical interpretations of the law without reimagining them, without